Sure.
There's a few right there. Anybody read comments?
Well, hello.
Oh,
Hello.
And thank you very much. My name is Paul Kupperberg, and I can speak about Supergirl past and a little bit about present because I watched the show. But you know, any future, I'm clueless. Yeah, I used to write the Supergirl comic back in the 1980s. I started off when it was a backup feature in Superman Family, and then it got its own title. And at that time, we took the character. She had a rough time. The 1970s and 80s were not very nice to Kara. She started out in the late 50s in Action Comics as a backup feature. And it was pretty straightforward soap opera. Although that was pretty unique at the time. Like most stories in those days where every issue was one story, one off, done, and then you moved on to something new next month. And in the case of the Supergirl strip, they did a lot of continuity, which was unusual for DC in those days. And frankly, Marvel hadn't been invented yet, so. Yeah. But after that run, which lasted for a lot of years, about 10 years in Action Comics, she started getting put all over the place in Adventure Comics as a backup, a feature here, something there. She joined the Legion of Superheroes. She'd leave the Legion, and they did all kinds of. Everybody who took over the character did something new with her. Tried to do something new with her. There were Bob Kanigher did this, and Mike Sikowski did that, and John Albino tried that, and all these different things, and nothing worked, and the strip didn't last long. The books got canceled, and then finally she wound up as a back feature in Superman Family in the that was the mid '70s. Although when I took it over, it was right. That was I have to get my own timeline straight sometimes. I have different continuity. I've been retconned so many times. I have no clue where I am at the moment. Right, so she was in Superman Family. I took over writing it in that, and at that point she was a soap opera actress in New York. I guess she was kind of seemed to be in her mid-20s and, established, but I took over the last bunch of issues of that, and then it started in its own title, The Daring New Adventures of Supergirl. And they weren't that daring, but they were new. So like everybody else, there you go. There's a copy.
Adventures of Supergirl.
That's right.
Wow.
Daring.
Wow.
So, and like everybody else, I took the character and did something new with her. In my case, I kind of, without ever saying she was younger, I just moved her to Chicago, because I happen to know Chicago. I had lived there for a few years, and I thought it was make an interesting place to settle her, and sent her back to college. I never said that, how old she was. I never said she was undergrad, postgrad, just she was, back as a college student. And, the Daring New Adventures took off from there. And that lasted about 2 years. And then along came something called the Crisis on Infinite Earths, and wiped out about 2/3 of my work. But I was writing Supergirl and Superboy at that point, and Superman too, the Superman newspaper strip and the Superman comic books, and all that went away when they the Crisis came along. But we were actually going to relaunch Supergirl and Superboy in a new title, in a book called DC Double Comics, and it was going to be a rotating 40-page book, 24-page lead feature, 16-page backup, and we'd rotate those between Supergirl and Superboy. And we were just sending them both off in different directions. Carmen Infantino was going to take over drawing Superboy, with Klaus Janson inking it, and he actually inked one page. And Carmine drew the whole first issue. It was lettered. I have copies of it. It's great. And Supergirl was going to be Carmen Infantino was off it, and Eduardo Barreto was drawing it. He drew the first issue as well. And Bob Oxner was going to ink that. And like I said, we had the first couple issues written, first issue drawn, and then the crisis came along, and these characters ceased to exist. And post-crisis, it was a few years before they brought back the Supergirl character in the form of, I think, Matrix. Here's where I start to get a little hazy in this, because again, there's another case of the changing everything, and I think DC does a retcon every 3 weeks now. So it's really hard to keep track. But again, she went through hard times. She's, for some reason, instead of treating, I always treated Supergirl as kind of like, she is Supergirl. She has been Supergirl for a while. She knows how to be Supergirl. She's good at being Supergirl. Be Supergirl. And everybody else is kind of like, well, it's, nowadays everybody has to be very angsty and have a lot of aggravation and trouble. And but that's kind of like, like my Superman smiles. And you don't get that, the Superman today does not smile. Supergirl does not smile, except on the TV show. But yeah, so, a lot of people took her through a lot of different paces. She was this person, she was that person, And finally, fortunately, the TV show came along. And, they really seemed to get it. They just, picked up on what makes the character work. I see, and again, I don't think any of what they do is necessarily based on anything that I wrote. But, I see that character in the show reflected in the character the way I wrote her back in the 80s. So, I figure if they're kind of taking the same approach that I did, then they must be right. So, but anyway, that is Supergirl, and that's all I have to say about Supergirl Unprompted. So if anybody has any questions, any discussion points, yes?
2 questions, Paul.
All right.
Was it true that the success or lack of success of the Supergirl movie was a determinant on whether she was going to live or die in crisis? I had read somewhere where if that movie was successful, the character probably wasn't going to be on.
I'm sure if the movie had been successful, she would have survived. Yeah. I don't know that it was necessarily determined, because I think by then, the movie came out around the middle of my run on Supergirl, because that's when we had to change the costume and add that stupid headband, which they didn't use in the movie after all. But I'm not bitter. So I don't know that, by then I think they knew that the movie was a flop, so, yeah.
Were you instrumental in getting her hooked up with Batgirl? Because I know that was around your era where they, did team up stuff.
I did, didn't I do it? I think I did a story.
I thought you did.
I think, or maybe it was just a scene in an issue of DC Comics
I thought they were
Presents.
trying to get, some kind of a feminine world's finest going there.
Yeah, well, that was back when, I was a young boy and still reading the stuff in World's Finest. Yes. Remember when our hair was dark? Remember when we had hair? Back in the olden days, they did try to, and I don't think it was feminist, because this was mid-60s. I think it was more like, isn't it cute the girl superheroes are getting together? Because, it was the 1960s.
But I thought you tried that in the 80s also. You tried to get something going there.
Probably. I mean, I didn't personally. I think by then, had Killing Joke? No, Killing Joke hadn't come out.
No, not yet.
I never really got a chance to cross over with her in Supergirl. Yes?
I know in the first Supergirl movie that Supergirl fell in love with a boyfriend named Ethan, who lived in Smallville, as I remember from her first film.
Right.
And she lived in Argo City with her parents, Zorel and Laura.
Right.
And that was from the planet Krypton, and she lost the Omega Hedron. and she had to go retrieve it, which she did at the end. But before she left Ethan, she had to kiss him goodbye and say, I gotta go home.
Yeah.
What's your question?
Well, I was wondering if they're ever going to continue from where she left him to the present day.
Well, I don't work on the comic books anymore, but I doubt if they're gonna use anything from that movie. I mean, it wasn't very popular. It didn't, it was, it didn't really capture the character very well. So they're probably gonna just let that stay where it is. And Faye Dunaway is still going, no, really, Yes.
What's your favorite part of the show?
My favorite part of any superhero show is usually the character's secret identity. Because when I was writing Supergirl and Superman and Superboy and all that stuff, it was always more fun to write Linda or Clark than it was to write, the Superman stuff. Writing superheroics is easy because it doesn't have to be real in any way, shape, or form. Superman picks up a building. Well, no, he doesn't. Physics says you're wrong. But you can do that in a comic book story, in a superhero fight. But when you're doing the secret identities, when you're having these two people or this group interacting, it's got to be real, and that's a lot tougher to write than the superhero stuff. That's just that's filler. I like Clark Kent. When I was doing Superboy back then, there was this conceit in the book that Clark acted like a total wuss because it was like, and his explanation was to himself was, if I catch that football, then the other kids might suspect I'm Superboy. There's a lot of kids in Smallville who catch footballs and nobody thinks they're Superboy. But that was it. Like Clark couldn't do anything because, if I act like a normal kid, they're going to think I'm Superboy. You got a problem, kid. Just relax. So when I started writing them, one day I had a few pages to fill. So I did a scene where Clark is going through the park or the schoolyard or wherever, and he's invited into a touch football game. And he goes into it, and suddenly he realizes, what am I worried about? And he catches the football, he runs it, he gets it, doesn't use his superpowers, he just does it, And everybody goes, good move, Clark, and they go on. And suddenly it's like, oh, wait, I don't have to do that anymore. And that's how I wrote the character, and I gave him a girlfriend, that wasn't Lana Lang, and I just started treating him like a normal kid because that's realistic. And the other one was like, how do you write a character whose motivation is, I can't be normal because people will think I'm not normal? That's a tough one. Yeah. Yes?
My first experience with Supergirl was the Batman vs. Superman movie with her in it.
Mm-hmm.
And before the Supergirl TV show came out, that was all I really
Is she
knew
in
about
there?
her. Huh?
Is Supergirl in?
Not in the-
Supergirl
Not in the live action.
Not in the live action?
No, not like the
Oh.
live action one, the animated one. From
Oh, I haven't seen that, okay.
Yeah, she's like a main plot point in it. I think
Okay.
she goes to Apocalypse at one point.
Who hasn't? That's another story for another panel.
But until the Supergirl TV show came out, I really only knew her as some stupid girl who went to Apocalypse for some reason. And I only started watching Supergirl because of the crossover with The Flash, and now I love her.
Yeah,
So,
she's a great character.
Do you have any suggestions on where to start with her in the comics?
Well, I think Sterling Gates is doing a real nice job on the comics that are coming out now. He's I think he's got her. I haven't been reading all of them. I don't get comics for free anymore, so I don't read as many as I used to. But come on, they're $4 a pop. Are you kidding me? No, that's good. Buy comics, people. But no, everybody has their own way to, to treat a character, to handle a character. And, it's unfair for another writer to say, well, if I was doing it, I would do this or that, because, well, I'm not doing it. And, I don't know what his editorial instructions are. It may be like, this is the way I would have been given the same instructions if it was me instead of him. And why wasn't it me? No. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'd have to think about it before, if I were to take over, if I were to start writing Supergirl and I was given a clean slate, even based on the TV show, how I would approach it, I'd have to think about that. That's, that's kind of the spine of the spine of the story, and that takes some thought. So. Yes?
Since Supergirl got moved to the CW, are you interested to see what they do with the show, and then how the show will interact with all the other shows that are on
Oh yeah,
CW?
absolutely. No, I'm loving this stuff. It's like, there was that episode at the end of the previous season of Flash, where the Golden Age Flash's helmet comes skidding out of the thing, and it's like, and I'm a grown man. I was 60 years old at the time. And I'm sitting there in my living room alone, and I jumped up and clapped like a little girl. So, I'm very interested to see. And in fact, I just, here I got the picture, I just met John Wesley Shipp
I met him
and
too.
shook his hand. But, no, I think, I really like a lot of the shows. I think Flash is just dead on for the most part. I know a lot of fans kind of like, well, it's not like the comics. It's like, no, it's a TV show. Get over it. It's okay. The movies and TV shows are different. They have a different audience. They have different needs. And frankly, if every fan who whined about how they hate how this stuff is treated didn't watch the show or go see the movie, nobody would notice. Because they're not the audience. These things are made for a general public who don't get, all the stuff, and they don't have the history that we have with it. So it's kind of like you got to judge it as its own thing. But yeah, I think Flash is awesome. I think Supergirl is great. Heroes of Tomorrow has some unrealized potential. Arrow's getting a little tired, but too much grim and gritty. Enough already,
Especially
and I wrote Vigilante, so. So yeah, I love this stuff. I'm a fan. I'm watching it, and I'm looking forward to more shows. And like the Marvel stuff on Netflix. It's like, oh yeah, I should get around to watching that one of these days. And I haven't. And I don't know. But because it's not the DC stuff, which is way better than Marvel, right, kids? All right. Anyone, please speak up. Let's have a free for all. Honestly, I came totally unprepared. I thought there would be other people here. If you don't help me, I'm doomed. Oh, thank you very much. Recipes, anything. I don't care.
If they could bring back or create a show for any comic book character, who would you want it to be and why?
I would love to see the Metal Men.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with the Metal Men. They were a group of robots created by Will Magnus, thank you, I was blanking. But yes, they were seven, and they're based on, each one is built out of a different metal, gold, lead, aluminum, tin, platinum, and each one has a personality to suit the metal they're made of. So lead's a big kind of lumbering, kind of slow guy, and gold is very bright, and the leader, and tin is timid, and great characters, and they were created in about 1964 or so, 63, 64, yeah, by Bob Kanigher, who was a maniac and a writer and editor. And I do mean maniac. He was like certifiable, great guy. They had an issue of Showcase coming up that the feature that was being prepared for it wasn't ready. Showcase was this tryout book that they had, that they would try out things like Green Lantern and The Flash and Lois Lane, for their own titles. they said, somebody came to Bob and said, you got anything for us, because he was an editor at the time, and he said, don't worry. And so he went home Friday night and Monday morning came in with a 24-page script for the Metal Men, which is fine. I could write a 24-page script over a weekend too, but he created the Metal Men in that 24-page script, and it's just, the concept is dead on, it's there, it's one of those things you pick it up and you go, it's all there, you know. The characters don't change, and they are so much fun and just so like goofy, but you know, like these robots who act like humans. You know, they have these responsometers in them that allow them to have human emotions. So the Platinum is a female robot. She's in love with her creator, Will Magnus. There's unlimited potential with these guys. Science fiction, there's the human, you know, there's the soap opera element, there's all kinds of stuff. And what would you like to see? If you could pick.
Harley Quinn.
I'm
Because I
sure.
like her timeline and I like.
I was
learning
guessing
about
from the
her.
top.
Yeah. I actually have a kid at my job that loves Harley Quinn to
Yeah.
the point where she'll come in with a shirt and I'm like, I'm gonna steal your clothes.
But yeah, I'm sure. And let's see how the third weekend of Suicide Squad does. See if there'll be a Harley Quinn show.
Have you seen it?
Not yet. No, I haven't had a chance. I will get around. I'll sneak in one weekend. Yeah, one weekday, you know, in the afternoon. That's a nice part of being freelance. You can, like, you know, go see movies at 12:30. Anyway, go ahead, speak up. Come on. Oh wait, 6:50. Oh no, 7:15.
Yeah.
Yes.
What are you currently working on right now, freelance stuff?
Freelance stuff. I'm involved in a group. We kind of picked up the name of the old Charlton Comics group. Nobody's used it for 30 years, so we figured, what the hell? And Roger McKenzie and Mort Todd and I have a little, publishing group, Charlton Neo Comics, and we're trying to get that off the ground. Hopefully get into Diamond soon, so we can, get into comic shops. And also doing some prose writing for people. I've got a few projects I'm working on, proposals for. One's for a nonfiction graphic novel, and I've got a how to write comics book that I'm shopping around now. So, things like that. Not too many comics, but hopefully I'm actually talking with Archie right now about doing a new series for them. So we'll see. Yes.
Who's your favorite DC villain?
Favorite DC villain. Let's see. Wow, it's a tough one. I like Darkseid a lot because he's just like total badass. It's like if you want to do something despicable and evil, Darkseid. But I do like Lex Luthor. Like, he's another one of those characters that's just got this great potential. Because, when I was growing up, he was a guy in a gray prison uniform who used to spend what seemed to be millions of dollars to build these devices to rob banks. So I was like, I don't see the profit in this, Like, banks don't keep millions of dollars in them. So, but again, like, with the relaunch in 1985, they showed that, Byrne and Wolfman showed that you can take this kind of one-dimensional character and make him really cool and interesting and give him a good motivation and, make it work. And then, of course, 30 years later, have Jesse Eisenberg kind of screw it up. But, hey, that's neither here nor there.
Do you think it'd be harder to break into comics
Yeah.
nowadays?
Yeah, no, I did no, I get asked that question a lot. When I broke in 1975, I started writing for I started writing for Charlton Comics, which is a small company in Derby, Connecticut. Cheapest publishers in the history of comics, probably. They used the cheapest paper, the worst printing. I got paid $5 a page for script in those days. The same as like Steve Ditko and John Byrne or whoever. And, you know, I could send in, you know, these short stories. You could write a 6-pager or an 8-pager and learn, you know, learn how to screw it up on those. I did a lot of those. I did them for Charlton, I did them for DC, you know, House of Mystery and the War Tales and all those things. And you really learn a lot just by, you know, writing these short stories, because writing a 20-page story, or, you know, like, boy, 20 pages, that's a lot of real estate, you know. And these days, you get 6 times 20 pages, because everything's a 6-parter. So, you know, any idiot can write, you know, a 120-page story. You got all the room in the world. Try doing that in a 6-pager, where
With a beginning, middle, and end.
a beginning, middle, and end, where you're introducing brand new characters in every story, because it's a horror story in a House of Mystery, and a new setup, a new bunch of characters, you know, so you can't even lean on the fact that, well, this is Superman, everybody knows who Superman is, so I don't have to set anything up, I can just bring him in. So, you know, writing that's a great experience. I mean, you know, forget about writing your graphic novel. First write a couple of dozen, you know, short stories that kind of twist ending, you know, the Rod Serling, Twilight Zone twist ending kind of things, whatever, horror, even straight horror. You know, and then, but I was also kind of, you know, I was heavily into fandom in those days, which was an interactive thing. You know, it wasn't on Facebook. We got together and we published fan magazines, and, you know, and got to know the professionals, and, you know, published. Paul Levitz and I grew up together, and we used to publish a fanzine called The Comic Reader. And, you know, we were a news fanzine, so we'd spend a lot of time going up to DC and Marvel and gathering news and stuff. So when it came time to say, you know, I'd like to, you know, submit some samples, you know, I knew the guys. Now you can't get through the door, you know. Used to be, you'd go up to DC, if the receptionist knew you, you'd wave and you'd walk in. Now, you know, forget it, you don't even get on the lot to get in the door, you know, at DC. So, yeah, it's a lot tougher, it really is. Your best bet is to, you know, publish your own stuff or find a small publisher. Breaking in as a writer is very tough anyway, because an artist, you can look at 5 or 6 pages of work. A letterer, a colorist, an inker, you can look at a few pages and go, sure, yeah, I can see the talent. But for writing, you got to read a few stories. You can't just read a story, because any schmuck can get lucky with a good story, trust me. You know, you got to read a bunch of stories to know if a writer can write. So, and editors are a cowardly and superstitious bunch, and lazy, and, you know, like, reading some unsolicited manuscripts is like right underneath, you know, getting your teeth cleaned and you know, washing the dog. So, yeah, it's tough. It's tough. And frankly, you know, even for somebody, I've written over 1,000 stories for DC and Archie and Marvel and, you know, name it, and I call up nowadays, and it's like, you know, I don't expect to ever get this phone call returned, you know, because editors don't answer phones anymore either. That's, you know, or emails. But again, I'm not bitter,
You mentioned
merely observant.
You mentioned Archie. Do you like what they're doing nowadays?
Yeah, I like so. Yeah. I think Wade's stuff is great on the Archie book, and the Adam Hughes book. It's interesting. I need time to, you know, a few more issues to see where he's going. But yeah, I like generally what they're doing, and hopefully I have a proposal into them for a new Archie horror thing.
Yeah.
So.
Who came up with Archie the Punisher? Was it
Oh, that was a long time ago. Yeah.
Conway? Was that Jerry Conway or?
I know Jerry wrote it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That
I don't know who proposed it first, but yeah. What, Gene Colan? No, that was yeah, I don't remember the
Yeah,
artist.
I guess.
Oh, that was that Riverdale thing they did, that Gene Colan drew
Oh, yes.
back in the 90s, yeah.
So I know this has mostly been DC, but who would you say your favorite or most tolerable, at least, Marvel character is?
Oh, I like Marvel characters. I like a lot of them. I was kind of like Spider-Man. I mean, I wrote a couple of novels with him in the 1980, and always regretted I never got a chance to write the comics, but I think that would have to be it. My favorite character at DC, by the way, is it's Superman. Actually, my favorite character at Marvel is Captain America. I don't know why I didn't think of that right off the top of my head. I've got 18 statues and action figures in my living room. Captain America, thank you. And at DC, it's Superman and Plastic Man. And you?
Marvel, I think probably Spider-Man, yeah. DC, The Flash.
I do like the Flash.
The Neo Carlton,
Charlton.
Do you have the right, are you able to use the characters from what Dick Giordano has?
No.
It is Neo.
It mostly Neo, yeah. The action hero things, DC acquired those in the 80s, those are off limits. Although we can do, if we want, a Dan Reed Blue Beetle, because that version of Blue Beetle is public domain. The Dan Reed, that blue chainmail suit. But we've decided to avoid that aggravation because they have lawyers and we don't. So, there are a few, I wouldn't even call them the second, tertiary characters that are out there, and most of them are not worth bothering with, although we get plenty of submissions. It's like, everybody wants to do the yellow bee. And he's like, yeah, he was a guy who dressed up in a, like a bee kind of motif, and he didn't have superpowers, but he did keep a bee in his belt buckle he would let loose to harass and annoy people. That's my second favorite after Madame, what's her name, Madame Rogue, which was a quality comics character, only one issue. It was an actor who dressed up like a little old lady to fight crime. Come on. What better concept is there? Trans dressing, cross-dressing, old lady cross-dressing. Come on. That is a comic. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, it's like, you know what? I can publish anything I want in Charlton Neo because it's my comic book company. I may do my own version of this.
Might have something there though. The baby boom is getting into the old folk homes. So
Yeah.
that might be something.
Yeah. Very close. I'm looking at places. But someplace warm. Please, everybody, speak up.
What can you tell us about
My
the?
favorite DC characters when I was growing up was Hawkman.
Yeah.
But you don't see a lot of him going out, but I think that would be that would make a pretty doggone good movie, I think.
They do use him and Hawk Girl or Hawk Woman in DC's Legends of Tomorrow, which is one of the TV shows on the WB.
CW?
The CW. It used to be the W.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm old. On the CW. So I think it's on Thursday nights? Yeah. So I think they're in reruns now. But they have used Hawkman and Hawkwoman on that. It's a good character, yeah. I've written some version of him, I forget which. But, it's just great. It's just kind of, it's a weird thing. It's like, well, wait, how does he get through the door, It's a weird visual, but yeah, I think especially with actually, you ever see the movie Brazil? It's a Terry Gilliam movie, and it's just kind of it's basically 1984, but done like Terry Gilliam would do it. And this guy has these flying dreams where he's this armored winged warrior, and I wouldn't be surprised if Terry Gilliam was aware of Hawkman because But he really, and this is back in the 80s, and he did brilliant flying scenes, even back then with this. So, yeah, you could do something great with Hawkman.
He's a very obscure character, but
Yeah.
he was one of my favorites.
Yeah, no, he's got, and those early issues by Joe Kuber, he's...
The Charlton movie. what was your involvement in that, and do you have anything to talk about in terms of that?
Well, I did a panel at this convention when it was back at the, in Bridgeport, at the arena. We did a Charlton Comics panel with me and Jenny O'Neill and, you know, a few other people. And the filmmakers, they just dropped in to rest their feet. They didn't, you know. And you know, then they wound up sitting through the panel and thought it was all very interesting, because it's a great story. I mean, the founding of Charlton Comics is just, you know, it's funny. It was two guys met in prison. You know, one was in for copyright violation, and the other was a corrupt lawyer who was in for some political scandal. And they were both doing a year and a day, and they met and they became friends. And when they got out of prison, they started Charlton Publications. They both had sons named Charles, so they Charlton, and they started publishing music lyrics magazines, which is what Santiago, who had been a bricklayer previously, prior to being a publisher, had gone to prison for, was printing music lyrics without copyright permission, which back in those days was something you could get sent to prison for. And but they, you know, they did it legally this time, and they had their own in Derby, Connecticut. They had their own factory, everything from editorial to printing and shipping under one roof, which no other company ever had. It's like they could create a comic book from concept to shipping it out the door to the newsstand in one building, which was like, you know, amazing. But they had this crappy press. It was originally made for printing cereal boxes and had to be adapted to print magazines and stuff. And when they found they didn't have enough magazine work to keep the presses rolling, because it's expensive to stop and start these things, they looked around and said, oh, these comic book things are selling, do comic books. And they never cared what the comic books were, they just wanted the presses to roll. And they wanted them to roll cheaply, so they never paid well. In fact, there was in the 1950s there was a flood in the Housatonic Valley, and the factory was flooded out, and you know, they cleaned it up. But you know, guys, in order to keep this place going, we're going to have to cut page rates, and we're going to cut them in half. But you know, stick with us. And so everybody, all right, yeah, sure. So they, you know, down to $2.50 a page for a script. And years later, we find out that they had collected fully on their insurance on this thing and did not need to cut the rates, but they saw an opportunity. Anyway, it's a great story, and a lot of people got their start at Charlton Comics.
Was it the off-Broadway for being a comic professional? I mean, where else could you start?
Yeah, well, that was it. Back then, it was, you know, they didn't care what they published, so they would publish just about anybody. Trust me. Look at some of my early stories, you know. I sent in a bunch of and again, I knew the editors. I had spoken to them, you know, on a fairly regular basis. But still, you know, they didn't buy the stuff because they liked me, because nobody does. But you're making faces, but you know what I'm saying. I mean, you have that same look about you. Yeah, so yeah, it was. But they were really they were just low rent. They used the cheapest paper. I joked that you could smell it starting to decay even as it rolled off the press. You know, their printing was registration. You know, lining up all the lines and the colors and everything. And it didn't matter so much. So you would get, you know, things printed askew and trimmed badly, or you'd open up the cover and be like, you know, this would be an issue of Haunted House, and you'd open it up and be like, the secret romance inside, you know. Double covers, you know, different. I bought a reprint of one of my stories that I didn't have, so I bought it on eBay, and the comic comes, and it's the cover, you know, and I open it up, and it's a different guts, you know, so. But, you know, but there was something charming about the stuff, and like guys like Steve Ditko, like, you know, Marvel would have paid him 3 times as much as he was making at Charlton, but Charlton left him alone. He could do what he wanted, he could write, draw, do whatever he wanted, and nobody cared. As long as you didn't violate the comics code, you were cool. And so a lot of people worked for them and a lot of people broke in. You know, there was Joe Staten and John Byrne and Mike Zeck and Jim Aparo, Don Newton, you know, I mean, a lot of really talented guys worked there, and me. And, you know, we either jumped off to other places or some guys stuck around. But, you know, Steve, like Ditko, leave me alone. I don't care about the money, you know. He's an odd fellow, but very interesting. Actually, he's he's not odd, he's just unusual.
But not rich enough to be eccentric.
He's not, you know, he's got his politics, he's got his worldview, and he's one of the few people I know who is like, even to his own detriment, perhaps, you know, monetary detriment. Because I know that Marvel sends checks to people for things that, you know, appear in the movies, even if they're not obligated. DC and Marvel both, you know. A check will show up and you go, what's this for? And it's like, well, we used this in something, so, you know. And there's contractual as well, you know, but, you know, you have to sign something in order to get that. And Steve ain't signing nothing. So, you know, he's given up money because it's like, no, that's the past, I don't care. I'm moving ahead. And this is from an 80-something-year-old guy, so. I admire him, and
It's like an Alan Moore type of thing.
No, Alan Moore's a jackass who thinks he's a magician.
He won't take money for his stuff, but for the movie.
Yeah, he takes plenty of money for plenty of stuff. Yeah, he's okay. I mean, yeah, he made this big grandiose move with the Watchmen stuff, and it's like, you know, it's like, you know what, good. I'd rather see the artist Gibbons get the money. He's a much nicer guy, and he doesn't smell so bad. Anyway, ask me about anybody. I don't care. Nobody's hiring me, so fuck them all. Dick was a sweetheart. Dick was one of the nicest people.
Didn't he
Yes.
pretty much bring the gang to DC?
Yes. Yeah, he brought, when he was hired away from Charlton in 67 or 8 or 9, somewhere around there, he brought Steve Skates and Jim Aparo and Denny or Sergio O'Shaughnessy, as he was calling himself back then. And
did Brent get Ditko in?
he brought Ditko in for a while. You know, he came in for a while with the Hawk and Dove and Creeper, and then something pissed him off and he went away.
Oh, did the Question too? Didn't he do it for DC?
No. Denny revived that with Dennis Cowan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great series. That was the best anybody's ever done with any of those Charlton characters was Denny O'Neil and Dennis Cowan's Question series. If you have not read it, go track down the trade paperbacks and read it. It's great stuff. But it's Denny O'Neil. And on that note, we've strayed far from Supergirl. But thank you all for coming here and for the enjoyable conversation. And